Welcome, good people, to the Eye for an Eye podcast. That is Mo Betta, aka Mr. Act Like It. I am Brooklyn Taylor. We are your hosts. Today's episode, the topic is you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We're going to break that down. What do you got, Mo?
Hey, good evening, everybody, or good morning to you. No matter where you're at, this is, in fact, the Eye for an Eye podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment when you get a chance. This pushes this good information and wisdom out to the masses, and the more people that get good information, the better the world will be. But yeah, we talking about you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. This is a pretty common idiom that we've probably all heard. We're going to talk about it from different angles, of course. We're going to talk about the history of it. We're going to talk about how it's been used across history and politics and even in our own individual lives. This is going to highlight the theme of reciprocity, cooperation, and self-interest. So I can't wait to talk about this with you guys. This thing actually has a history, y'all. And that's the reason why we bring you the history. So we want you guys to remember is that when we talk about these idioms, cliches, and phrases, they started somewhere. And they have relevance in the time that they had relevance, but they have also transformed and they now have relevance now. So I'm ready, Brooke. You ready, man?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, look, this particular idiom, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's been traced to the origins of the 17th century in England. As a matter of fact, the first recorded use can be traced all the way back to the 1650s in literature, and it's usually referencing, like mutual help, but in a more pragmatic sense, all right? But literally, guys, and this is why we do that, this literally was used as a phrase because when sailors were on a ship, they would scratch each other's back to relieve itching from lice. So being on a ship was not always a pleasant thing, and Long John Silver didn't always, even though he had the patch on his eye and the hook on his, hook for a hand and a peg leg, obviously, we praise him, but he didn't have a good life, because the sailors on there were prone to disease. They were prone to illness. They were prone to infestations. When you spend that amount of time at sea and then you go into a foreign country, believe it or not, you go, unfortunately, that's where they would go and meet, maybe the whores, of the area at the time, unfortunately. And sometimes, you could bring something back to the ship that you wasn't expecting. But in this particular sense, oftentimes, they didn't have sanitation like we had. So oftentimes they would be in infested areas after they've maybe, robbed a ship, or sailors or pirates or whatever. And oftentimes lice would be prevalent. And they would usually stand there and they would scratch each other's back to just relieve the itching. So unfortunately and fortunately, this is a great phrase. What you thinking, Brooklyn? You sitting there with that confounded look on your face.
Well,
ain't that weird, though?
I'm not confounded. Remember when we were in boot camp, one of the reasons that they shave the heads of all the recruits is get rid of lice, because people will bring lice from wherever they're coming from. Lice is more prevalent in certain groups than others, but especially if you have long hair, if you have hair on your head at all, then lice can go from one person's head to another. But that's why they shaved our heads in boot camp. And I'm kind of surprised now that they didn't think of that or do that, back then on those ships, because that would have
shaving backs.
Well, I mean, I think the lice particularly is going to be on your head, I would hope. And maybe if you have long hair, maybe they had long flowing locks or something, and the hair, then the lice would crawl down their back, or just being infested with lice is gross. But
I know, it just sounds like a painful thing, man. I would hate to experience it.
I mean, to have lice to the point where you need somebody else to scratch your back is bonkers. But that's how it's. I believe when you say that that's how it started, and that's crazy.
It's incredibly crazy,
Gross.
man.
Yeah, like people romanticize a lot of things in the past, especially when they're adventurous, but it's not glamorous to be infested by lice. It couldn't be. Thankfully, I haven't experienced that, and I don't want to.
Yeah, and we've both been on ships for an extended amount of time,
Right.
so we're really grateful, that something like that didn't happen to us. Now, it was funny because, it was used in a literal sense, but over time, evolved into a figurative speech, which is supposed to be for means of mutual benefit. Also was linked, to early trade and guilds and communities, where they had survive off of reciprocity. If you remember, we used to call that the barter system, that if you did this favor for me, then I would trade this for that. And that's oftentimes quid pro quo. Yeah, definitely. Before capitalism came about, before the exchange of money for goods or money for services, people usually had to perform services for services or provide a good for good or provide whatever. But money wasn't even prevalent. And we've been around long before capitalism hit the world. So this is kind of how people went about attaining wealth or attaining a certain means for survival.
Yeah, I'll give you 6 sheep and you give me 1 cow type deal.
Right. And when I make the milk from the cow, then, I can give it to you, and maybe, and heck, even in the kind of like an exchange like that in marriage back in the day, where if I give you my child rearing daughter, you usually had to give me a dowry of some kind. You've spoken about dowries before. Talk about that so these young people know what that is, man.
Well, a dowry, as we actually spoke about recently, but a dowry was a thing and is a thing, and still in some cultures, where when 2 families were involved in a marriage occurring, let's say someone's giving away their daughter's hand in marriage, and if you go back far enough, they're literally giving away their daughter, but giving their daughter's hand in marriage, and the man's family would pay a dowry, because once the woman's family gives that woman up, they'll have less help on the farm and less resources, and they'll be missing a daughter that's helping cook and things of that nature, or sew, or whatever she was doing. So the dowry is, in order, if we're not using money, we'll make up for it with gifts. For instance, your most beautiful daughter, who is also trained in reading, writing, arithmetic, and horseback riding, and she's a world-renowned chef, whatever. You're giving 3 cows because she's so valuable, and then you get her, and then so she's gonna produce and help raise your grandchildren, things of that nature. So there's always been that dowry thing, and still exists in the world today. So yeah, there's always life is about a value, an exchange of value, and there are various exchanges of value, and just like it's very difficult for a person to get along in this world completely by themselves. Sure. Is it possible? Yes. You can build a log cabin and be off in the woods and have your weapons and have some livestock and grow some fruits and herbs and vegetables. You can live completely autonomously. You can live completely independently. You could do that, but that's not how human beings as a species usually work. We work with cooperation, We do things for each other. We exchange value, and the value proposition is often wildly diverse in what it could be, right? Sometimes you just want to call a friend and talk to them. That friend might be funny. That friend might be a calm listening ear if you're going to vent something. And there's value in that. And hopefully both people find value in that, and they can depend on each other both ways. But if you can call and confide in me, but you don't have the time when I'm calling to confide in you, then you're not scratching my back, even though I scratch yours all the time. And, some relationships are like that.
Yeah, man, indeed. Speaking of value, and thinking about a woman's value back in the past, all of those things that you said are true, where, she cooks, she may clean, she may have a particular talent, but I believe at the time, the most important value that a woman had was her ability to create sons, because sons are usually the ones who work out in the fields. Sons are the ones who usually were the ones who tilled the soil and mined the sheep, and there were shepherds. Women traditionally worked inside of the house, but if you could create 8 sons, who can all go out in the field and work, then believe it or not, then she was considered extremely valuable, especially if she come from a family that mostly created sons. So people looked at breeding and other things like that, to kind of gauge a woman's value, or one means of gauging a woman's value, which is unfortunate, because women have more value than that. But at the time, they weren't seen like that. And women still to this day can be valued, in their ability to create heirs for us, or heirs, heck, nowadays, heirs for themselves nowadays, in their ability to make babies, so to speak, But
the problem with that back in the day was the lack of science, right? That's why, was it King Henry VIII that kept killing his wives? Kept killing his queens?
I think it was Henry VIII. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was King Henry VIII.
Yeah, it was like Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. So what happened is that, to your point about, let's say this man wants 8 sons. The problem with finding the value in women to produce him sons is that women don't produce males. The father determines, because it's the XY chromosome thing, the father determines the sex of the child.
Right.
In fact, I watched a video recently and it talked about why Marines and Navy SEALs have so many daughters. Sometimes they have all daughters, because the more stressed you are, the less, at the time, the less chance you have of being able to produce boys.
What?
Yes. So 100% of the time, and this is why it's crazy, the history of like men being mad at women for not giving them sons. It's 100% the man's fault when it's,
yeah.
what sex the child is 100% determined by the man.
Right.
So if a woman has 4 daughters straight for you, that's not, she didn't do that.
Her fault.
Yeah. But that wasn't learned until pretty fairly recently, some point in the last 50 years or 100 years. And so therefore, in the past, it was thought that this woman is not delivering me the heirs that I'm looking for.
Yeah, unfortunately.
If they knew that, they probably would have found a way to blame it on women. Whoever the most powerful people are, blame the least powerful people.
Yeah, well, now we got a scientific means of blaming men for everything because that's the era we tend to be in. We're getting blamed for everything.
I
So
mean,
at least this one, at least science backs this one up. So you can't argue with the fact. You know what I mean? But moving on, I want to start a whole nother conversation about something that might be a good ass. There might be a good idiom for that one that we're gonna have to break down. I kind of starting to get the feeling that that's going to be a discussion for a later date.
I mean, I don't really see where we're gonna get an idiom for that, but yeah, fair is fair.
Daddy's baby, mama's maybe.
As far as, huh?
I said daddy's baby, mama's maybe. Now,
that's a whole other.
Yeah, now the sex is daddy's baby and mama's maybe. So
yeah, gotcha. But no, yeah. So that's how it is. The father's genes. I'm not a scientist, but I've read about it, and I'm trying to let me see if I can find something real fast. 2008 family tree. Men determine the sex of a baby depending on whether their sperm is carrying an X or Y chromosome. An X chromosome combines with the mother's X chromosome to make a baby girl, and the Y chromosome will combine with the mother's to make a boy. So you can bring an X to the party and have an XX and make a girl, or a man can bring a Y to the party and join with the woman's X and make a boy, but a woman doesn't carry a Y chromosome, so she's not ever going to determine, alone how that pans out. But of course, Henry VIII did not know that, so he was like off with her head.
Pretty much. So young men, just remember, don't bring an ex to the party. Because we don't want to have, if you want to have some boys, if you want to have some boys, you gotta bring the X and the Y to the party.
I'm positive. I don't think it's legal here in the United States of America, where we're filming from, but I'm positive that some countries manipulate during the fertility process to try to, get what they want, whether boys or girls. As we've known for years, maybe it's stopped now, but at one time, China was limiting people to one child, and people wanted a boy so that the boy could become a man who would take care of the parents when they got older. And so they did things to ensure, sometimes horrible things, to ensure that they had, male children and not female children, which later caused a whole other problem, obviously, when the country's flooded with, boys and young men, but without women.
Hey, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, obviously. You know what I mean? But, moving on, I want everybody to think about this for a second, okay? Since this particular idiom speaks to reciprocity, do you think reciprocity was more authentic back in earlier societies when survival depended on it, compared to now when it's kind of more or less tied to personal gain? So do you think, honestly, that it was easier back then, or that it meant more back then than it does now, to where we tend to tie things to personal gain as opposed to survival? So think about that in your quiet moments, and let's move on. We're going to talk about different use cases for this particular idiom. All right. Casual uses. We tend to, friends use this, hey, look, man, if you take care of this, I'll take care of that. Workplace collaboration where, maybe, if you take care of my expense report. I remember, kind of a tangent here. I remember my dad, right? He used to always talk about back in the day, right? My dad, everybody knows anybody who knows my dad was a deacon in the church, right? And all of my adult life, or all of my life, my dad was a deacon in the church. But it's crazy because I tell the story how my dad actually came into Christianity. What happened was he was working at Ford Motor Company with a bunch of other friends, right? And this one friend, his friend of his name was, ironically enough, his name was William Perry. Not the refrigerator, but William Perry, right? And he and my dad worked on the same shift. I believe it was the second shift. And my dad, he wanted a day off so he could go party. You know, he didn't want to go to work on his day, so he was looking for somebody to swap shifts with, right?
Right.
Now, this is a positive, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, right? So my dad went to Mr. William Perry, who later on became a minister at the church that my dad was, and later on became a pastor of his own church. But at the time, my dad was, just looking for a way, I need a Saturday night off so I can kick it, because my dad, like most men, were young and idealistic and, trying to find out where the honey's at. Or we called it honey dips, in our day. Remember that, but they probably had another name for it back then, but, trying to chase the ladies. Well, anyway, Mr. William Perry decided, hey, look, I'll change shifts with you, but I'm going to need you to go to church with me in return on one of these Sundays. And my dad, like anybody else who's addicted to the life, so to speak, you're gonna hesitantly agree. So he agreed. Well, my dad kicked it that weekend pretty tough, and it was time to go to church. He went and he showed up because he was a man of his word, and he showed up, and that's the day my dad gave his life to Christ. And since then he's lived as a deacon. And I'm just now learning that maybe my dad was somewhat of a hellion back in the day. He used to get with it back in the day, right. Which is the total opposite of me, right? But anyway, yeah, that's a good story about how, you can scratch my back and I can scratch yours. What's up?
No, that makes sense. I mean, you have to decide what kind of value is being brought to you. He really wanted that day off, and Mr. Perry really wanted him to visit the church, because that's what evangelism is about. You want with anything, right? You want somebody to see this movie. You want somebody to check out this car. You want somebody to check out this neighborhood, and you're evangelical about it. And so he was like, hey, sure, I'll do that for you, but I need you to come by. And he did. And it worked out great, because I'm sure it was great for your dad's, spiritual life and maybe his life in general. So in that case, that's a really positive example of scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Do you have any
stories of that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was watching last night for whatever reason. I decided to watch the political TV show, political intrigue, drama, Scandal. The first season. So there's the president
Good show.
of the show, Fitzgerald Grant. He has a vice president that was, of course, his opponent when he was running for president, but he made her his vice president. So he needed to she's just thinking of the future, where she's going to want to be president in the future. But in the present, she's blocking the things that he's trying to do. And so he asked for a meeting with her, and he expresses to her that if she scratches his back, he'll scratch hers. In other words, he says, I need this bill to pass, and you have the honor of being the tie-breaking vote. And she's like, I'm not going to agree to that. I'm not going to sign it. And he's like, listen, You will sign it. And here's why. I know you want to be president after I'm done being president. And can you tell me of the, whatever it was, can you tell me of the 28 presidents who were president after becoming vice president? Can you tell me how many of those did so without being endorsed by the president they served under? And she's like,
Right.
0. And he's like, well, then you're going to sign this. You're going to scratch my back on this. And I'm going to scratch your back on that. And we're going, and because basically this is not the hill you want to die on, right? Because I know what you ultimately want. You ultimately want my job. And the only way you get my job, as long as I'm breathing, is, me doing my job and then endorsing you later. And that's really how it's been. If you think about real life, if you have a half-hearted endorsement or no endorsement from the former president, you're not going to get elected in all likelihood. So that's and I don't even want to say it's a negative scratch my back, I scratch yours, because the sailors didn't necessarily want to scratch another grown man's back, but it was situationally necessary. Sometimes you gladly scratch your friend's back, right? We've known each other for decades, so
yeah,
there's always going to be somebody, I'll buy the drinks, I'll pick up the tab for dinner, you pick up the tab for lunch. There's always going to be like a back and forth sharing of value when you're friends with somebody. Over a long enough term, you're always going to be doing things for each other. And so you do that without thinking or without worrying. However, if you're in a work situation, like I just described, if you're in a professional situation, then that quid pro quo is going to be a little bit different, but effectively the same. I didn't realize it was from the sailors. I thought I could see something like that happening with medieval times in a suit of armor. Like it would be difficult to put on your suit of armor yourself. And I'm sure the knights didn't. I'm sure, if you're a knight, you had staff to do that for you before you left. But if you're out in the field, you're probably going to have to find another knight. Hey, take this off for me so I can adjust it, or help me out with whatever. Because you're literally walking around, in an Iron Man suit of the time. But yeah, what's your experience?
Well, I think that no man or woman is an island, which we've heard in other podcasts. Yeah. And the concept, I believe that human beings inherently are community people. I just think that inherently we're like lions. Lions need a pride. Lions aren't isolated animals, unlike tigers that are not very social, and they don't hunt in packs. They tend to hunt individually. I believe that human beings are in fact community-based entities or beings or whatever you want to call it. So the concept of scratch my back, I'll scratch yours is prevalent everywhere. I don't think there's a single aspect of our being as human beings on this earth where that isn't true. It's true in relationships, be it personal or business. As a matter of fact, there's a whole entire occupation dedicated to finding a means of scratching my back and you scratching mine, which is called lobbyists. That is entirely the identity of that particular person in that role. Their role is to get their desired result and shake the hands that need to be shaken and or shaken, and grease the palms that need to be greased for the sake of getting whatever bill or whatever restriction lifted or restriction added. It just depends on how you see things as politically. So, So listening and talking to those kind of people, you realize that everything is business and nothing is personal. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on from that, you know, we use this nowadays. Even, I mean, there's not going to be a human being on this earth who doesn't use this phrase, whether you speak it or not. You know, you could be in the jungles of South America and never really come into contact with you know, modern civilization, you know, but even in the civilization that you're in, or in the crew, or the, I don't know what you call it, the group or the tribe that you're in, this is prevalent. And this is a phrase that goes on where we don't even speak it. It's just a fact, you know.
Yeah.
The problem with this particular idiom is that a lot of times people have found a way to use this similarly to the last podcast where we talked about, where people use this as a means of manipulation or intimidation. You know, people will come to you, and I want young people to be cognizant of this and be, you know, and pay attention to this. But people will come to you and do favors for you, small favors for you, with the hope that you'll be available to do large favors for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's always, you know, a precarious or, you know, an unfortunate situation. So what? You give me $5. Do I really have to loan you $250 now? You know, because I loaned you $5. So let's switch it up a little bit and let's talk about the negative aspects of this, or the manipulation that can be involved in this. You know, there's always a person out there with an ungrateful mindset, or an ungrateful spirit, as we like to say. And they don't mind doing convenient things with the hope that later on you'll be totally inconvenienced on their behalf. Have you ever experienced something like that? Because I definitely can speak to that.
I have experienced that, but the first thing that popped into my mind was I was watching an interview with the Boston Celtics player, down with Boston, go Knicks. But the Boston Celtics player, Jaylen Brown, a very, very bright young man. Everybody knows he's extremely intelligent. But he was going high in the draft. I don't know if he went number 1, 2, or 3, but he went very high in the draft.
He went number 4.
He was in the top 10 in the draft, and he had a lot of offers from sports agents, and he asked them exactly what he gets out of signing them as a sports agent, and they were like, "Oh, you get a lot. We'll set you up in an apartment, and we'll get you a car, and we'll do something for your parents, things of that nature." And he was like, "Yeah, but what is that? Is all of that free?" And they're like, "Well, no, we're going to give you that, but then we're going to get whatever it was, 5%, 4% of your contract." And he's like, "Well, I'm projected to be in the top 10, right? So that contract, when you're drafted that high, is a large contract, right? Every rookie contract isn't small. You get a pretty large contract if you're drafted high." So he did the math and he said, this doesn't make sense, right? Like, let's say they're going to give me $100,000 worth of stuff, and then I sign them as my agent, and they're going to make $5 million a year off of me for years, right? So it didn't add up to him. The back scratching wasn't equal. The value proposition wasn't equal. And then he realized that every NBA player has to pay into the players union, and therefore can be represented with whatever perks that comes with perks. There's lawyers and transportation and things that some NBA players probably don't use because they're already paying an agent and they're already paying whoever, or they just don't utilize it. Like, I think everybody has access to some things, you can live in a town and never take advantage of getting a driver's license, getting a library card, going to the whatever is, a public pool or public park. Those things are available to you, but everyone doesn't use them. So in that case, he decided that the agents that were lobbying to scratch his back, they didn't really have anything to offer of value, of enough value that he would do that. And he said he believes himself to be the highest drafted player who didn't have an agent. He just represented himself. And on top of that, they did things to try to drop his, they did hit pieces, articles and such to try to drop his draft status, but it all kind of backfired and he still got drafted high. So, that's the kind of thing that can happen where people are offering to scratch your back and you're like, it's not even worth it. And you can find that in relationships, you can find that in jobs, you can find that in friendships, and again, like we spoke about in previous podcasts, it's up to you as an adult to have that discernment and to decide what spaces and what people you're going to remove yourself from in order to not be taken advantage of, with any value proposition.
Indeed. You know what's crazy, man? This makes me think about, and you hear young people talk about this all the time, is the record business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what often happens is they sign a contract and they're usually provided what's called an advance. Now, right. An advance could easily be money, or an advance could be something given to you that has value. If you remember, Tupac Shakur, the late great Tupac, was signed to Death Row Records, and this is a story that is out there. That oftentimes he wouldn't get paid in money. He would go to Suge Knight asking for his money, whether it be royalty money or otherwise. And I can't speak to this as fact, but I can say that it was a story that was out there. And oftentimes he would go to Suge Knight asking for his money, and Suge Knight would turn around and get him a Rolls Royce. Something of value, but here's the thing. There's this
Rolls Royce is not money.
Right. There's this thing in a business or in record business, the phrase or the word is recoupable, meaning can I get cash value out of this, provided that I have possession of it? Because everybody knows that as soon as you buy a car, the value, pulling it off the lot is lessened. So yeah, you can give me a $250,000 car, but is it worth $250,000 once I drive it? So a lot of times people are giving gifts. So if you're a young man or young woman out there and you're, trying to get in the record business, understand that, yeah, they're going to give you something of value. That's to kind of keep you. But ask yourself and ask them, is this something that's recoupable? Meaning that if I were to sell it, do I get the value out of it? Or if, a lot of people can be giving cars and it's still owned by the company, so to speak.
Right.
And then you turn around and, you try to sell it and you can't, because guess what? The company owns it and you're just somebody who has it, but you missed out on the money, So make sure that, your business is taken care of. But moving on, let's, I like to always, with every segment, ask a question. And this question, I know a lot of people have asked yourself, so think about it a little bit more. And that's, do you keep mental scorecards of favors, or do you give freely without expectation? There are times when we do that, or I can speak to myself. There are times when I have done things, with a certain amount of expectation, maybe not even immediate, because reciprocity is important to a man. We love to give, but we also want to know that we can trust to receive if necessary or if needed. Well, nobody likes to just empty. Nobody wants to date or be associated with a vacuum cleaner. Somebody who just comes and just keeps taking and taking and taking and taking. So there has to be this like balancing act, Brooklyn. Now let me ask you this. Do you think that there's a blurred line between kindness and manipulation in this regard?
Yes, right? Because you can, if someone's being kind and or generous and they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart, it's usually pretty apparent. But however, there are times when people are not being kind. For instance, a lot of men are horrible at dating, and this is what I mean. They want to rush the process, and they believe that if they do something like, taking a woman out to a very, very, very expensive restaurant on the first date, then that will get them closer to their goal, or that will impress the woman. But that's, no one ever owes you anything during a date. A date is two people trying to get to know each other. So it's as the kids would say, doing too much. It's doing too much if you're, if you're trying to spend $1,000 at dinner, and it's not like the birthday of someone you've been with forever. You're on a first date and you're trying to impress, right? So you're trying to accelerate the situation by going to, let's say, a very expensive restaurant. You're being manipulative. Are you being generous? Technically, but you're also being manipulative if that's, if you've got some kind of alternative motive or, nefarious, thoughts in mind. So generally, if you're just doing things out of the kindness of your heart, it's pretty clear that you're just doing things out of the kindness of your heart. But when you're trying to manipulate, like for instance, it's always been that way, right? In sports, it's the reason that what's the man's name? It's the reason Reggie Bush doesn't have his Heisman, right? They were giving everybody gifts in college, but they decided that while the coach and the athletic director and the alumni and everyone was in on it, they decided that Reggie Bush needed to get stripped of his, his championship and his Heisman trophy that he earned on the field, because gifts were given. And that quid pro quo and that scratch my back, that was part of the deal that I'm sure many schools were offering him because he was like the best in the nation at the time while they were recruiting. So there are those times when that can bite you, where it actually didn't bite the school. They didn't give back the millions or billions they made while he was there. It didn't bite the coach because he didn't get fired or reprimanded or get his stuff stripped. But it bit that young man at the time. So, there's a way, and you may not know, for instance, you may not know when someone's trying to manipulate you, right? Because they're giving you gifts. The agent, you're like, oh, this sounds great. I don't have money. I'm going into the draft, NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever, right? And so, or I'm in the music business. They're giving me this advance for this project. I'm excited about it, but they're going to make sure that they tax you for everything. They hit you for everything. Oh, you thought we were just giving you that bus for the tour? No, you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay us back for that. You're going to pay us back for the cars. You're going to pay us back for the alcohol. You're going to pay us back for everything. And it's happened to many, 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 many musicians, unless they, handle their business properly. They either, they had people watching and they didn't accept any money that they couldn't pay back and things of that nature. Because, music business, All of that is just a very, very, very bad bank loan.
Heck, all business, if it ain't in writing, is bad business. But let's keep it on this dating aspect thing. Let's talk to these young people out here, man. Fellas, no matter how much money you spend on a woman, that doesn't give you the right to demand something that she's not willing to give.
Amen.
But here's the ladies and gentlemen, understand that this world is about an action and a reaction, right? So if a man spends on you like that, and let's say he's doing it free-heartedly, like he's really just that kind of guy, I'm not telling you to sleep with him, I wouldn't dare say that. But understand that you may be walking into a situation that the expectation may be there. Now, I say that to say this. If you know that there's an expectation afterwards, but you honestly believe that you don't have to do it, then don't go on the date. You're setting yourself up for a troublesome situation. Not that the man is going to do anything, but just the mere fact that now everything has a level of expectation, whether we want to believe it. If you work 40 hours a week, you're expecting your check to be a certain amount of money. If you're going out with someone and you know that they are rolling out the red carpet and they're really trying to impress you, you should be asking yourself prior to that time, what is my end goal out of this? Am I going on this date to get to know this person? Or am I going on this date for a very expensive free meal? Am I going out with him because I have nothing else left to do? And it's Tuesday night and I know he's going to do it. Make sure that with your actions that they're all honorable. That you're doing these things with a genuine and real intention, because it can lead to you can't keep having dinner dates for the sake of the dinner. Eventually, you're going to end up on somebody's T app somewhere and they're going to let the world know that this is how you get down. So I tell everyone to approach dating and approach all of these things with a genuine interest. But if you see that some person is just not being genuine and there's no quid pro quo or there's no plan for actual reciprocation. Now, when I say reciprocation, just because you spend $500 on a meal don't mean that somebody got to turn around and spend $500. I used to always have this saying that I would tell women that I was dating: I don't need you to match my deeds. I just need you to match my effort. So as you see me trying, you should try just as hard. But I don't expect you to pay for what I can pay for. I don't expect you to take me on a trip if that's just not in your bag. I don't expect you to do that. But I do expect you to be doing something. Hey, if I'm the one with the money, then come through. I don't mind buying groceries so you can cook something real nice to say thank you, or to say, hey, look, I really like you, or something like that. We have to find a way to balance the sheets of our own lives and treat our lives as somewhat of a business, so that everything balances out, as opposed to just going around doing shit and thinking that it's everybody else's obligation besides yours. What say you, King?
I like that. I like that balance in the sheets. Yeah, I think it's often talked about, and I think that people need, on the dating side, people need discernment about who likes them, right? Just earlier today, there was a man who posted on social media. He sent a picture of flowers he had the woman saved in his phone as the air that I breath. I guess he meant to write the air that I breathe. Right.
He forgot the E.
Right. And he wrote, it was a screenshot of him sending, holding flowers and saying, I got these flowers for you. And she said something like, find a way to utilize the same energy that you use to get those flowers. Use that same energy to leave me the hell alone. And people had a lot to say, a lot of negative things to say about the woman, but then some people said the things that I thought made common sense. A statement like that is not going to come out of nowhere, right? You don't get any earlier context. He just posted that, that jab of hers. However, that sounds a lot like a woman who has told you repeatedly, who told you nicely earlier that she was not interested, or she wasn't buying what you were selling. If someone's saved in your phone as the air that I breath, then you should actually be in a relationship with them. It was coming off stalkerish, right? Because
cringe. That's totally cringe vibes right there.
If this woman is in a relationship with you, then she knows she's in a relationship with you. If she's in a relationship with you, she's not surprised you're sending her flowers. If she's in a relationship with you or has any interest in being in one, then she'd never react in that, because that response was overt and not covert. And what we know,
indeed it is,
from literally a scientific perspective, is that women, often for safety reasons, will be covert. Women will literally give a guy they're not interested in their phone number because they're afraid of a violent or angry or embarrassing reaction. So, there's really a delicate balance, and so when most women are just regular, decent people trying to go about their lives and giving subtle hints when they're not fully interested in the person pursuing them. And if a woman gets to the overt stage where, hey, look, I am not interested in you, go away and do not bother me again. She's told you 10 times. She has said it every way she could say it, and she's at wit's end, and that's why she's saying it that way, right? And people need to not be oblivious, and they need to pick up on Blue's Clues. So that's kind of what it is with that.
Mm-hmm. Hey man, another question.
Sure.
When somebody helps you,
mm-hmm.
do you feel pressure to pay them back? And what does that kind of say about most people's boundaries if they feel a morbid desire, maybe not morbid, but an incredible desire to pay somebody back? Does that say anything? I'm sure it's subjective and it's situational as much as possible, but that's just something that we all tend to, think about. If you want to answer, by all means, but it's more of an introspective question.
Yeah, I think with that one, it's kind of like, I think it's not as much being. First of all, I think a good policy for anybody,
mm-hmm.
William Shakespeare said, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be," right? So I think it's very important to give what you can give as opposed to lending. So if someone asked you for $1,000 don't lend them $1,000. If you have it and can afford to, you give them $1,000.
Give them $1,000.
And that way, if they never return it, it was a gift. If they return it in a year, wow, I got my $1,000 back a year later. But you're not waiting a year for it. If it happens, it happens, right?
Right.
And also, when people owe you money, you'll see that they disappear. Like, they'll just disappear. And that could either be, that might be a good thing. It was probably a small price to pay to get rid of someone who wasn't a genuine friend or partner or whatever. So I think from that perspective, you really protect yourself. And a lot of the stuff we talk about ends up about what's the best way to live your life, what's the best way to protect yourself and your loved ones, what's the best way to live right, live with purpose, live with honor. Some of those things aren't important to people anymore, but I think for most good people, those things are still very important.
For sure. And this, contrarily, people got to understand the difference between people giving you something with a purpose and doing something else. You know what makes me think, like, a contrarian way of looking at this is, it makes me think about how this can be a negative, right? And one way it can be a negative is through bribery, but even when a person gives you something, if they maliciously try to hold it over your head, believe you me, you'll learn, that wasn't them being friendly. That was in fact a freaking bribe. And a lot of people do that. Hell, most of us, whether we want to believe it or not, we do conditional relationships. We may not admit it, but we do in fact get with somebody for what they can do for us or how they can make us look, or how, a man with a beautiful woman on his arm is going to feel better about himself no matter what, no matter how he got her. If he got to cut the check, he's going to feel better about himself with her on his arm. A woman is going to feel better about the man she's with if he can provide security, whether that be physical security, whether that be financial security. You're just going to feel better. But understand that it's likely that it's not going to end well, because both of those are kind of a form. I'm trying to, as you can see, I'm trying to talk a lot.
What's the line between?
The line is always intent, and the line will always be knowing the intent. You know what I mean? There's a difference between someone doing stuff for you out of the kindness of their heart and it, versus someone who's doing something knowing that they're going to want something bigger later on. You'll often hear me mention discernment. Know your audience. Know the people that you're around. These are what we learn in our soft skills when we utilize our soft skills in our conversation, in our interactions with people. You start to learn the body language of somebody who's being manipulative. You start to learn how people talk when they're trying to take advantage of a situation. What we used to say when we were younger, when we knew somebody was lying when they would say something like, well, what had happened was, we knew right off bat, hey, that's a fucking lie right there, right? You about to tell me some bullshit, or you're about to, make the story bigger than it is,
Or as our boy T-Dog, shout out to T-Dog. T-Dog used to say,
what up, though?
This person's calling you and trying to paint you a cloudy day.
Paint me a cloudy day.
Paint me a cloudy day was when someone's calling you and they're telling you everything is bad, the world is falling apart, they need money for this, they need money for that, they need this and that. And so they're they're calling you usually out the blue, even after never having checked on you, and
Yeah.
they're pretending to ask you how you're doing, but they really just need something from you.
They're priming you or grooming you for the come up later.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
So, go ahead. So let's think about this, and let's continue to think about this. Should good deeds be unconditional? Yes, no, maybe. What do you think?
Oh, I thought you were asking the audience a rhetorical question.
I know, I'm sorry.
I mean,
I do that often.
It is like when you're doing something, you should do it. When you're doing something for someone else, you're supposed to be doing it out of the kindness of your heart, right?
Right.
The issue is, you're definitely going to feel a way if there is never any reciprocity, right? If you're always reaching out to your friend and they don't reach out to you, if you're always doing something sweet for the person you love and they never do anything for you, if you're always checking on a friend or a family member and they never check on you, then the lack of reciprocity, you weren't doing it conditionally, but the lack of reciprocity makes it glaring that you're not equally yoked, so to speak, in the relationship, business partnership, friendship, right? Because we're friends. Sometimes you call me, sometimes I call you. I'm not calling you because I need you to help me move. I'm calling you because we're friends and I just want to talk to you, and we talk, right? You're calling me because we're friends and you just want to talk to me and we talk, right? And there aren't any conditions for that, and there don't have to be conditions for that, right? Now, if every time you called me, you needed to borrow $10,000, and whenever you weren't borrowing money, you were not calling me, then that is, that's super conditional. You're not interested in talking to me if you cannot get any money from me. And there are people like that.
And that's why this particular phrase, it really requires you to practice it so that you can learn the differences, so that you can keep the scales balanced, so to speak, because nobody wants to be known as a user and nobody wants to be used,
Amen.
But I do have an introspective question. If every act of kindness had an expectation, would we still value it? And have you ever felt used even in a mutually beneficial dynamic? Keep that in your brain housing groups, people, as we move on. We've heard these, like we've already talked about the term quid pro quo. We've already talked about what it means. Different religions, they call it different things. Confucianism says that it's called renqing. I can't pronounce it. It's renqing, I think, RENQING. In Christianity, it's called the Golden Rule. African Ubuntu philosophy says that it's more or less communal support. There's a distinct difference between transactional reciprocity and unconditional giving. So we have to practice this particular thing, being the giver and sometimes the taker, so that we can fully grasp it and understand it, because this is quite complex and we don't always know how to. There's a saying we used to say, sometimes I'm the fly and sometimes I'm the windshield, or sometimes I'm the hammer and sometimes I'm the nail. The only way to get good at being both is to practice being on them both and knowing when to be the hammer and when to be the nail. So, if you're 17, it's going to be a lot different than when you're 35. and how you deal with these particular situations. So don't get discouraged if you're 19 years old and you're feeling used and you're not quite sure how to handle it. Don't turn around and do a complete 180, or maybe you should do a 180 so that you can understand the other side of things, so that things can kind of balance out in your life. Because that's all we're looking for, is balance, because balance is health, and we all want to live a healthy lifestyle, And the reason why I say balance is health is because, if we look at our bodies, if you have a gland that produces too much of a hormone, if your body produces too much insulin, guess what? You're a diabetic. If it doesn't produce enough insulin, guess what? You're a diabetic. You know what I mean? So a lot of times we can do too much and it can harm us, and we can do too little and it can harm us. So I implore everybody to think first, think again, and then act, But we've been talking about this now for a little over an hour, or quite a bit of time. Brooklyn, any wise words regarding this particular idiom or phrase?
I think I'll leave the people with this. It feels good to be properly utilized. If you have knowledge, whenever people have a question about what car they're trying to get, or they have a problem with their car, they'll call me. If they have a problem, if they have a question about an aviation accident or something that's happening in aerospace, they'll call me, right? A lot of times they have an issue with the relationship, or what they think they should do, or want a sounding board, they'll call me, right? So there are those things that people can utilize me for, and I will gladly give my time and resources to try to help, right? But there's a difference between feeling utilized, which I think you can feel proud to be properly utilized, and feeling used. If you feel like people are not caring about you or your loved ones, or your health and welfare, but they just want things from you, then you're going to feel used. You pick up your phone and you look at it, and it's spam likely, scam likely, and there's some people that are in your life that are scam likely or spam likely, right? They're just trying to take the oxygen out of your room. They're just trying to use you for something, and that doesn't feel good, right? But it's up to you, as we said earlier, as an adult. You have to start to pick and choose and say, okay, I'm not going to give my time and energy to this. I am going to give my time and energy to that. So my thought is just use discernment, and always quickly realize if you are being used or if you are being properly utilized.
Indeed. You know what? You said something so profound that it made me think of something else that I heard that was incredibly profound. And I'm going to go ahead and end it with this and close out. But I remember hearing Israel Adesanya. If for those who don't know, he was an MMA champion in UFC. Young brother, I think he's from Africa. But he once said, I don't mind being used because it shows that I'm useful. What I don't want to be is misused and abused, So I keep that in mind whenever I think about this. And true wisdom says that knowing when reciprocity builds versus when it corrupts the community. You have to kind of know when it builds and when it corrupts. And lastly, I want everybody to ask yourself this, is what kind of back scratcher are you? Are you one who gives freely or one who gives to get? I am Mo Better, aka Mr. Act Like It, here with my brother Brooklyn Taylor. And we are, in fact, the Eye for an Eye podcast. And we appreciate your time. And Brooklyn got something you want to say, so take us home, bro.
I got one thing to say to bring us home.
Bring it home, bro.
Happy birthday to Mr. Act Like It. His birthday's coming up, and this is going to be the birthday episode. So happy birthday to my brother. Another revolution around the sun. Older, wiser, and bringing more and more value to this planet. And that's all we can hope to do, because you never get to, sometimes you don't get to choose what your legacy is, and you don't know who you're going to affect positively and who you're going to touch. And the way the world is set up now and the way technology is set up, people might be hearing these words 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. So I'd like to say, because of that, this is as good opportunity as any to say happy birthday to my brother. Enjoy your birthday, and enjoy your week, enjoy your month. But we're doing this. This is the Eye for an Eye podcast. We do it for the people. We get together and we try to share our knowledge and give some grace and shine some light. And my brother asked me to do this with him, and it's been my great honor, and I'm learning so much. And I want to thank you, and I want you to have an incredible birthday, brother.
I appreciate it, bro. Love you, man.
Love you, man.
Eye for an eye, y'all. Peace.
Peace.